Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never met me before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. And it was a day today, where I was a little bit anxious. I had made this big plan to go on to Instagram. I haven't been on Instagram in, I think, over a year now, since I made my deck of 54 powerful words. I made that decision that it was time for me to come back to YouTube, onto this platform, that I was still here throughout the entire 12 years, but I was only doing one day a week. And I had this live show on Instagram, What's My Good Cheer? I used it as a place to build relationships, to find my place and possibly a network of like minded people who were on their own journeys. But I found myself amidst the entrepreneurs. And though I didn't feel like I was in the right place, in all honesty, I have to really admit to myself, I'm in that situation now, in scrambling in putting the roof over my head. I find myself in that position of entrepreneur, out of need, out of necessity. But it wasn't in a place where it was my pursuit. I always felt that maybe I was a little bit too mature to start my own business. But I did love the mindset of the entrepreneurs. I love that never give up. I love the idea that we can learn through failing. And because I always felt a little bit like a failure my entire life, that I kind of felt comfortable there. And because I was determined to make that movement, maybe not to make a business, but to make it a place where I could get my platform to be noticed, to get my message to be noticed. Because my message was still the same message as the entrepreneurs, in that never giving up, that I felt like this was one place, one platform, one channel that belonged to me. The whole shebang belonged to me. And what a message that I could put out there for others, right? And what a reflection, what a mirror back to me, something that I could be proud of, right? That I could congratulate myself in a failure if I should fail, but hold that trophy up, have that recognition. If I could make my channel blow up, right? Things change. And that was the topic I was actually going to talk about today when I did my live on Instagram. Fortunately, it didn't work out for me. But there were lessons in that, and a little bit of gratitude that possibly I had made that move in coming back to YouTube when I did. And when I came back to YouTube, to come back with that luggage of, which was my show over there, What's My Good Cheer, and come here and exactly the same thing, right? It didn't change in any way. Of course, I learned in that process. I grew in that process, but it was only in an extension of what I was doing over on Instagram. The platform has changed over there. And I found that because I didn't 500 subscribers I had over on Instagram, loyal, dedicated, like I have over here. But Instagram has changed. And when I hit that live button, I was facing a notification saying that I had to have 1,000 followers in order to go live. Now, about 6 months ago, I did go live on Instagram. So I know it hasn't been a new policy for very long, but it was disappointing. And at the same time, in taking my lessons, hello, Tammy. Um, in taking the lessons, in what I thought in that moment was a failure, right? Was that understanding that, it really isn't a failure. That's growth. That's not just growth for myself. And in that message of never giving up, because I just went live or didn't go live, but I was able to post on Instagram just as a regular post. And I did a little bit of copyright, right? And I just let my heart out in that because in the moment, I recognized that I had that bit of relief in not being able to go live. Kind of the like that feeling I have every night when I go to hit that live button and just trusting that a message is going to come through. But that feeling, right, of a little bit of nervousness when I hit that go live button was like 100-fold, right? I was trying to talk myself out of it. Well, I knew I was going to go live, right? I knew I was, but I was nervous, right? I didn't want to. And then when it wouldn't let me, there was that sense of relief. And then, right, I says, well, I said I was going to show up on Instagram. I'm going to show up on Instagram. And so I just took a picture of myself and then I just started writing, right? I just started writing. And I just wrote what was in my heart, what was in my thoughts in that moment. And it took me, I don't know, 20 minutes to write that. And then I just let it go. I just had to let it go. But when I let it go, I found that I was having a hard time letting it go. And it stayed with me, right? In that little bit of sadness that I had failed, right? And I didn't really fail. And if I did fail in somebody else's eyes or in some part of me that's deep down there, because it was disappointing, but I didn't consider it a fail because I showed up anyway, right? It might not have been the way that I expected I was going to do it, but I showed up. And so, in that, I have to be, at the very least, content, at the very least, proud of myself that I found another way, right? That Instagram has lots of ways that you can show up, lots of ways. But then I thought after I did my live, does that entice me to go back and try again, to build my following up to 1,000? How long would it take me? Right? It doesn't matter how long it takes me because in the end, I'm doing this for myself. And if I only catch the attention of one person, there are lots of opportunities to expand in what I do, right? in the copyright, in writing, right? In putting out my landscape photos, right? I could do that. I might not be able to go live, but there are so many other ways that I could do that. So I decided every Wednesday, right? It's not going to make a big difference every Wednesday in going live, but it will prove to me in that never giving up, right? In trying. It's not like I can manage. I probably could if I wanted to go live every single day on Instagram, or not go live, but do some copyright. But copyright sometimes is difficult, especially when you get writer's block, when you are not inspired in the moment. And I'm somebody, if I commit to something, like I committed to going live today, last week I told myself I'm going live, right? Or I'm going to show up on Instagram. I didn't necessarily say that I was going to go live, but in my mind, I thought maybe I might go live, right? But like I said, there were lots of ways that I can post to Instagram. So why can't I do that every Wednesday? If I can only pick up a couple of people along the way, that's perfectly fine. But more importantly, when I went in and I checked my um, analytics on Instagram, my stats in Instagram, and I had oh over 50 or 60 views on that post that I had. And in that, I had quite a few likes, a couple of comments, right? And I thought, you know what? These are people that I haven't seen, I haven't interacted with in over a year. And so I should be showing up every Wednesday. I can give Wednesdays and do something a little bit different, right? Every Wednesday, a different topic, a different insight, a different connection. And especially if this peace treaty is going to go through, right? And things are going to get a little bit better with the Middle East. I tell you, I had so many beautiful people. I actually, before I thought I was going to go live, I didn't actually go live, but before I actually hit that live button, I said to myself, oh my goodness, I hope Iran has opened up media again, because they shut it down when things go badly with the world. They kind of shut it down so people can't interact. And I've made some friends in the Middle East, some beautiful, beautiful people. And I remember saying, right, I hope Shakiba shows up. I hope her parents show up, right? Maybe Iran has opened up Instagram so that, we can interact again. And it didn't work out in going live. But when I went back in and I checked my stats, and I saw that I had actually gotten some likes from some people in the Middle East. Now, different countries, right? Kazakhstan and Turkey and a few other countries. But I would have thought if they shut it down in Iran, they would have shut it down in these other countries too. And I thought, you know what? It's a good thing, right? I can give Wednesdays, and having a whole week in between now and next Wednesday, I could have a post ready, right? Something insightful, something real and genuine, something that might maybe impact so well that instead of maybe picking up one new follower, maybe I'll pick up 5 or 10. And it wouldn't take too long to build up that extra 500 subscribers that I need in order to go live. And that shouldn't be the goal. I like goals. You guys know I like goals, right? And I could set that goal of 500 followers, but I have 500 followers right now. And if I could inspire, right, motivate, connect with people that I connected with for many years on that platform, I think that could only be a good thing. So, in failing going live today, there were lessons in that. And that's the lesson, right? For tonight, we're going to talk about failing and the lessons in failing because it's important. Lots of people don't try because they're afraid to be made a fool of in front of somebody else, that somebody's going to find out that they got tripped up or they made a bad decision or they got in a bad relationship or they didn't do their makeup properly. It's always judgment, right? It's always judgment. And that's why we don't show up the way we know we could and possibly the way we know we should, right? We don't like to fail. And that's kind of the way society is made to make us feel, right? It's the world is set up that way so that we don't show up for others and we don't show up for ourselves. Because if we don't show up for others and we don't show up for ourselves, even, there is no movement. And you know how big I am on movement, even if it's just in baby steps, even if it's just going to be 1 day a week, right? You guys hear me say all the time that I have to be that example, right? I have to be the evidence that it can be done. And maybe it can't be done. Maybe I'll fail in that, but I'm going to fail by trying, right? By at the very least, trying. Okay, let me coming down into the comments here. No, Cindy, I feel you did not fail. You did show up live in another way. You took a photo of yourself and you wrote a post, so you did show up. And that's the way I feel about it. But I still feel bad because I kind of felt like I was locked out. Because if I hadn't left Instagram when I did, right? Possibly, we can't live in the possiblies, the what ifs, or if I had, right? You can't live that way because that's in the past, and you can't go into the past and correct the future. But you can go into the past and see what you've done wrong, what you could have done better, and apply that in the moment. And then that would affect the future. That's the way it's supposed to work. We're supposed to allow ourselves to make mistakes, to reflect on our mistakes, right? I look back on the failure of my marriage all the time. It's not like, I'm planning on getting into another relationship, but if it were to happen, I would need to know where I made my mistakes. And so it was important for me to look at my relationship, look at my marriage, look at how it started, looked at how it went along, looked at where the mistakes and failures were on my part and on his part, right? It's always two, right? We all take it on responsibility on ourselves like it was my fault, right? And I did that also in saying that because I was a gambler and I just in the beginning put the entire reason for our marriage falling apart into the fact that I was a gambler, right? If my husband had said, that's it, no more gambling, there wouldn't have been any gambling anymore because we were partnered in that marriage, and that marriage was everything to me, right? And I invested everything into that marriage. But because the way I felt about wanting him to be happy and free in that marriage, to be able to make his own decisions, he wanted the same for me, right? So he never said anything to me, right? Maybe every once in a while he grumbled because he didn't have any spending money because I spent it, maybe, right? But there were no ultimatums in that. And all he had to do was make an ultimatum, and life would have changed, right? So there were many reasons, right? I talk about some of them, right? Because they are pertinent to the failure of my marriage. But some of them are a little bit more personal, and then I can't vocalize them or talk about them because, right, this is um, talking and representing somebody else's story. And I can only represent my own experience in somebody else's story, right? And not divvy out the details of something that's private to somebody else, right? If it reflected on me, if it impacted me, if it impacted our marriage, right? For sure, it would be open for it would be open up for discussion. But I know what it feels like to be talked about in the background, right? In a negative connotation. And, there are parts of me because, I am a light in the darkness, and I am just as vulnerable to feeling bad, for feeling guilty, feeling agitated and scared and angry, right? Jealousy and resentment. I don't know why that never stuck to me. The only thing that I could ever think of that why that never stuck to me was the fact that it was so unreachable to me, that it wasn't even something to consider, right? Because of the way I felt about myself. And this is how come jealousy and resentment doesn't really impact me. It's not like I didn't admire, I didn't wish these things for myself, but I never begrudged anybody in their pursuit of what they wanted or what they had. I was always happy for them, right? Always happy for them. And that's something I think that helped me out a great deal. Because if I had to be that person who was stuck in jealousy and resentment, oh my goodness, right? I know people in my life who are in that cage, right? And it dictates their movement, dictates their movement to the point where they do things and say things that are not nice. And so the only thing in setting up boundaries, when I wasn't woke up to any of these ideas, I have all kinds of boundaries now. But back then, right, I just did not want to hear. I didn't want to know. And I didn't want it to get back to me that I was the topic of discussion. So, in the movement that I'm making right now, a big part of my story is what happened to me. and in recognizing that it takes two to tango. Sometimes it takes a family to tango. That there are more to my story, right? There's more failure and the reasons in the failure. And then the rightful owners of the blame in those failures. I am responsible for what happened. I take full responsibility for that, right? But I cannot take the responsibility away from somebody who ignited it, right? Through jealousy and resentment, right? This was one of the first lessons that I learned. And I didn't learn it for myself because like I said, it was nothing that ever stuck on me. But in the lesson of, and this is Wayne Dyer's lesson, right? If you don't know him, he's a thought leader. He recently, I believe, passed away, right? Amazing, smart man who made some incredible movement in his life. But this is one of my favorite lessons, right? That there is no justifiable reason for jealousy and resentment. It is such a detrimental, right? It's why people stumble over themselves in competition, in having those conversations about others behind their back that put out their foot and make it so people cannot achieve what they want to achieve, that they fall flat in their faces. And because the world is set up for us in failure, right? We need to learn that when we fail, that there are lessons in that. And the number one lesson is to get up and brush your knees off and try again, to keep going. You know, I held this one against my mother. My mother was a character. She was a character. But there were aspects of her that she grew up in, lessons that are passed down from generation to generation. And it is in that never giving up, in getting up and brushing off your knees. I used to remember as a tiny little kid falling and scraping my knees and bursting out into tears, and my mother grabbing me from the scruff of the neck, not running over to kiss the boo boo, to let me know that everything was going to be okay. You're not hurt, Cindy. There was none of that. More often than not, I would get yelled at. I might get a slap, right? At the very least, there was some gruffness in that. And I would be back on my feet, right? Because I felt my very life depended on it. I'd brush off my knees and suck back the tears and wipe the runny nose, and I would carry on because in the end, nobody really cared, right? So why? If I can walk, if I can get up and brush my knees off, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And that's exactly what I learned. And, that was a lesson for somebody whose lessons, for the most part, I didn't appreciate. But she had a lot of good lessons. She really did. But they were passed down to her from her parents and probably passed down from her parents and her parents, right? Going forward. And so it was just nature. It was just built into her because we utilize what we learn. We grow into the teenagers and the young adults and the mature adults, right? With the lessons that we learned as small kids, right? And there were lots of those lessons that I learned, right? And I didn't like all of them, and I didn't think many of them were appropriate, like that turn the other cheek, right? And what was that? Two wrongs don't make a right. That was a terrible one for me. Both my parents used that one. Two wrongs don't make a right. But it's so true, isn't it? Two wrongs don't make it right. But it's how you utilize that saying, you know, because lots of times as kids, we would fight with each other, right? We get rough with each other and hurt each other, right? Or try and get each other in trouble. And my sisters were always running to my mom, right? Cindy did this, Cindy did this. And I would be punished for it, right? But then when I would utilize that and say, oh my goodness, look, so and so did this to me, and I'd be crying, and right? They would just look at me. My mom would say, two wrongs don't make a right. And nobody would get in trouble for it. So for me, I learned about contradictions. I knew that things were divvied out differently. And I learned to feel that the things that were divvied out to me were just the way they were. It's what I deserved, right? It was what I would deserved. It was who I was. And I wasn't entitled to feel this way or that way, or, right, to feel jealousy or resentment. Never even crossed my mind, because the things that my sisters and my friends were able to accumulate in the goodies of their lives and the abundance of their lives, I just didn't feel that it was anything that I was entitled to. So if I wasn't entitled to it, why even be bothered with those negative emotions directed? I just was happy for them. And every once in a while, in a good windfall, if one of my sisters or one of my friends got a bonus, a little bit of abundance, maybe I'd be a participant in sharing that, right? Somebody got a bigger allowance than me, then maybe because they wanted to go to Saturday matinee, they would pitch in the difference with my allowance so that I could go too, right? So we have to look at our lives. We have to look at all the things that have gone in wrong in our lives and not dwell on them. Like I said, you cannot change the past. The past is the past, but you can learn from the past. You can learn from the mistakes and the failures. I used the example yesterday of the Olympics, right? If you wanted to be into the Olympics, no matter what sport it was, you just can't have that dream and expect one day somebody is just going to hand you the gold medal. No, you have to put in the reps. You have to fail. But when you fail in that, you look back at that failure and you say, what are the lessons in that? Right? What move did I not make properly? Or what can I do better? What do I need to do for myself? Right? In that mindset of, I could do it, right? I could be that example. And then also see yourself on that podium with the gold medal, right? Because you have to make your dreams real in your mind, in your imagination. You have to, because if you don't have that gold medal and you're failing, 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 the last thing you want to do is to fall on your knees and not get up and brush your legs off and try again. Just throw your hands up in the air and say, I give up. If you have that dream alive inside of you, right? Even if it does fail, right? It was the feed in the process that made it so you did not quit that time that you failed. And as long as you don't fail, or sorry, as long as you don't give up, right? There's always a chance. If you give up, you have zero chance. So my mother was right. Just get up, brush your knees off, right? We got grocery shopping to do, right? Whatever it was that we had to accomplish in our lives, right? You just can't give up on that because then you are a failure, right? You are a failure. And because we live in a society that is built and designed to keep us in that mentality of failure, of feeling like we're in beneath others, right? That that it's important for us to never give up, to find a way. And that's why I always say, if you gotta crawl, you crawl. If you're gonna do it in baby steps, you do it in baby steps. If you have to take those baby spoons of food and just one at a time and give it a half an hour to digest, if that's all you can do to get the job done, then you've got to do that, right? Because you have goals, you have dreams, and you have rights to those goals and dreams, despite what anybody says, right? Despite anybody. That word despite was my one word. I was moved to any ideas as a kid or as a teenager, as a young adult. But I had that word despite. That was my motto for life, right? Despite what you think, right? Despite whether you think I can or can't, right? Despite if you think I will, right? Despite, I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to do my darndest. And I might fail in that, but if I fail, if I fall, I'm going to get up. I'm going to brush my knees off and I'm going to try again, right? It's a great message. Wayne Dyer's message, right? There is there is no, if I want to quote it properly, there is no justifiable reason for jealousy or resentment. It was a great lesson. Now, if you never heard that lesson and you want to be inspired by a man who wasn't, I don't know, he was probably I know he was a spiritual man. He may have been a religious man. There's no reason why you can't be both 100%, right? I feel that way about myself sometimes, more and more all the time. But that's the tug of war, right? That's the tug of war that makes it so that it's hard for me because the most important lessons that I have inside of me that I know should come out, I can't bring them out because there's somebody else's story. And that person has to be able to be there to defend themselves in that, right? I can be the evidence, right? I can be the example in my own life. But it's the same thing with anybody else. And there's always another story, isn't it? And we should be feeling that out. We should be researching it out. And it has to be compounded as a truth. But in the end, it's only our truth, right? Our perspectives. And there's always two sides to a story, right? And so that's my challenge, right? That's my challenge. And I know it will break open, but that's the tug of war in me. That's the that's the a tug of war between the realist in me, the spiritualist in me, and the religious in me, right? And it is difficult to separate it because when you do that, right? Because there's the three parts, it's kind of like two parts taking up on the third part, and it can rotate at any time. You know what I mean? In that I second that, right? So everybody's got to trip themselves up. And they trip themselves up all the time, right? And if I could see through that and others could see through that, then maybe we all could see through that. Maybe whoever or whatever could see it too and come in and make it right, right? Not necessarily kiss the boo boo, but make it right nonetheless, right? It doesn't have to be my movement, right? It doesn't have to be my responsibility. My responsibility is to myself because I can only be responsible for my own thoughts, my own emotions, and my own actions. And yes, right? Those thoughts are mine, right? Those emotions are mine. But those actions, right? That's where we could really stir the pot because society has built it that way, right? So everybody has to show their own cards in the end. They really do. Because, like I said, there's always two sides to a story, right? Ours, theirs, and mine, theirs, and ours. I really do feel sometimes there's three parts of all of us, right? We just don't always get to recognize. We just stay in the one, right? We just, right? I love living in a realistic, I love that creation of the best human being that I possibly can be, right? That's why I feel that I am here, right? To be that example that I can be that good human being, right? Or at least in my attempt and in those failures and in those successes, that it can be recognized in the effort that maybe, right, in that deserving that I'll be able to make a little bit of movement, that I will be welcomed to make that little bit of movement, right? That this channel that I have here, which is all mine, right? As a small man, as somebody who never felt that they had the right to have a say, gets to have all the say. It's pretty incredible, you guys. It is pretty incredible. And it's not everybody's thing, right? And it's not always fun. And sometimes, like today, right? In not being able to go live on Instagram, it's a little bit disappointing, right? But it's no longer super scary, right? I'm no longer looking around me going, who saw that? Right? Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. I'm never going to go live ever again. Right? I'm not doing that anymore. And that's got to be a good thing. Right? That is got to be a good thing. I didn't manage to get out of the house today. I was going to go for a walk after my Instagram, but when I was thinking about going for a walk, I knew that I probably, because of the way that it's kind of my meditation, it's my kind of my own, my contemplation, that I probably would have contemplated too much. I would have been too much in my head in that. So I thought, well, maybe after my live show tonight, I would just go for an evening walk instead. Just stay on the main drags where there's lots of cars and lots of people, but go for a nice walk as it cools down. We are in summer now, you guys. Oh my goodness, we're hitting the 30s, which are like the 90 degrees in the state in Fahrenheit. So it's getting warm. It's getting warm now. Okay, you guys. I'm gonna come into the comments here because Tammy's just been yabbering without me. I have failings in my life just like others. Some of my failings, I tried to make it right, but it wasn't accepted. Now that's something too, isn't it? Isn't it, Tammy? Right? Yeah, I remember that. I had a friend one time, and I had lost a lot of weight, and and her boyfriend wanted me to break up with my boyfriend, who turned out to be my husband after a while, right? Wanted me to break up with my husband so that I could go out with him. I made the mistake. I thought, right, I was new to relationships and I thought my friend would appreciate knowing what her boyfriend did. And so I told her, and she jumped over a table and tried to beat me up. And she was one of my best friends, right? I loved her to death. And it didn't matter how I tried to make up for what I had done. I had done that, right? But there were lessons in that failure. If you were to call it a failure, right? In the end, they broke up anyway. You can't go into relationships with broken trust like that. And that's the way I looked at it. And that's why I told her that, right? But there was no way of fixing that relationship once a year or so because we live in the same neighborhood. We bump into each other. We're cordial. We don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about it at all. But that hurt is there, and that friendship is gone, right? And it probably would have been gone because as time passes, right? Life changes, your friends changes, relationships change, and probably would have happened. But yeah, I always felt bad for that one because if I hadn't said anything, I could have just said no to him, which I think I most probably did anyway, and just not said anything to her. But what if they had gotten married and he had cheated on her or something? That would have been awful, right? But in the end, that was that was on me and there was no fixing it. She wasn't accepting my apology. And I apologized a lot in that. I couldn't deny that it didn't happen, right? Because it did happen. But I did apologize because I it wasn't my intent to hurt her, and I should have recognized something like that would have hurt her a lot. But her flying over the tables to take me down, that was surprising. I didn't expect that to happen, right? But sometimes we don't think beforehand. We just jump in and we make these mistakes and we flounder, right? Yeah. Um, So that choice that I made, I have to live with for the rest of my life. And that's true because this happened 30 years ago, over just over 30 years ago. And I still remember it like it was yesterday, only because it was the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, right? About, failing, and then some people, right, they just don't accept it in your mistakes. But we make mistakes all the time, but we can't go back and fix them, can we? All we can do is ask for forgiveness or just say sorry, right? Bake a cake for them, right? Give them some space. And sometimes that space is only momentarily. Sometimes that space is forever, and we have to accept that. But there are lessons in that. There's always lessons in our failings, for sure. I asked for forgiveness and said that you were sorry, but it didn't matter. It did not help. So I have to live with that choice that I made in the past. Don't have to live with it. You just have to learn what the lesson is in that, right? Because there were lessons in that. And I'm sure in doing that, right, in whatever it was that you needed forgiveness in, you never did it again, right, to anybody, right? Because that's what happens when we get the lessons, when we understand the lessons. It doesn't happen again. And that's how we're going to resolve these world wars, aren't we? By learning our lessons. And we're getting better and better and better, aren't we? We are. Go back 1,000 years and see what we were doing 1,000 years ago to each other, right? Make you want to cry, make you wonder, right? How many generations, how many bloodlines did we lose because of all these warrings that we had? And I'm 67 years old. Oh, sorry, 67. Don't rush it, Cindy. I'm 64 years old. I'm going to be 65 this year, right? And I have never known war, right? My dad never knew war. My grandfathers did. But, that's something that I think in our failings we get to be better at avoiding. We go, oh my goodness, we don't want to go into that anymore, right? We don't want a war. We're done. And as a small man, we now have a voice. As a small man, we're keeping the big man accountable. Isn't that incredible? And you can credit this age of AI learning where we all have the opportunity to have a voice if we choose to, right? Okay. But also, in saying that, I have to remember nobody's getting away with anything. So our mistakes are forefront. If we mess up, guaranteed it's going to be written down somewhere. It's going to be videoed. It's going to be digitally stored. It's going to be used against you, right? Yeah. Yeah. So that's one other thing that's good about this age of AI learning, that nobody is getting away with it. Even with the cameras on every corner of the street, it's actually saving lives. It's putting criminals behind bars, right? That there are lessons in going to jail, and people are coming out of jail and they're going into uh, rehab, and they're going into these halfway houses, and they're getting counseling, right? These weren't things 1,000 years ago that they were doing, right? No, it was a free for all. It's not a free for all anymore. And as we move forward, we're going to learn that lesson very, very well. And there's always an example, there's always an evidence, not just for what's good, not just for what's motivational and inspirational, but also for what we're not getting right. And I guess we have to include in the failures too, right? We have to allow ourselves to fail, but not to fail at somebody else's expense. And there's the lesson for me in what I was just talking about earlier, that there's always two sides to the story, right? Right? Oh my goodness. There's always a lesson. Okay, I was married for 16 years. My ex husband wanted a divorce. I said okay because he said he never loved me. And then my ex husband put my kids against me. 5 years later, you remarried. Oh my goodness, Tammy, right? I never remarried. I was so I was heartbroken and devastated for years. It was one of my big crashes that kind of led me into the rebuilding of my life, right? That woke me up to some of these ideas. And, you know, uh, that opportunity was there for me, right? But I chose. And did I choose well? Did I fail in the choice that I made? Possibly. But I can't go back then and change things. I can only look back at the lessons, and that isn't a lesson that I've looked back on, right? And like I said, maybe I should, right? Because maybe that opportunity will come across my path at one point where I might delve into another relationship, even at 65, 75, 85, right? You never know. Life is like a bowl of there was a saying, jello, like a bowl of jello. No, there was a saying in that, because you never know. In the moment you make that decision whether to jump into it or not, and you can fail in your decision in that, right? You can. You might marry again and be in a totally really terrible relationship, or you could fall into one and it was the best decision you ever made, and you only made it to be comfortable, right? So you didn't have to do life all by yourself. And for me, that's a sad thing, right? That's a sad thing because, yeah, everybody, right? If you marry somebody just to be comfortable, are you going to take care of that person? Are you going to love on that person, right? Or are you going to tell that person after 10 years or 15 years or 16 years that they didn't love you, right? That would be absolutely devastating. Yeah. That was brave of you to be able to marry again, right? I don't know if I could have done that, right? I didn't have that much confidence. I was squashed too, Tammy. I was squashed too. But, right, you came out of it. I didn't quite, right? Yeah. I had a good thing. Once you have, once you had that amazing, I didn't think that anybody else could have competed with that. That could have made me as happy as my husband did, right? That's why it broke me so badly when my marriage ended. I was married in my second marriage for 3 years. Oh, and then your husband passed away. I hope they were a good 3 years, that he was good company for you. And in the end, right, that you felt that you were loved, right? Yeah, that's pretty important. Okay, you guys, let's get into a card. Thank you for sharing that, Tammy. I knew a little bit of your story. You had mentioned it once before, I think, so I kind of got a gist of it. I didn't know if you were still married or if your husband had, right? If you had gotten another divorce or if he passed away. It wasn't my business to ask, right? But I appreciate that you shared that, Tammy, right? And it just makes me have more admiration for you than I did yesterday, right? And that's the whole idea, just to grow a little bit every day. And it's in the talking and in the crying and in the time that we get better. Okay, you guys, here we go. Let's grab a card. Oh my goodness. This is a nice card to end the live tonight. We got this word kindness. Kindness is a gift that serves all parties, right? To remember to treat ourselves with kindness, especially when we fail ourselves and fail others. Lots of times we can't go into the past. We can't fix it. We don't get a redo or retry. Sometimes we do have to accept what we stepped into or what we stepped out of. But in that process, we can have that kindness, right? We can do that kindness and give that kindness to others. If I saw my husband, my ex husband, walking down the sidewalk and I was walking the opposite, walking towards him, and I noticed he was there, I would fly into his arms, right? And we would be hugging and kissing and probably crying. And then we'd go for coffee or dinner or, right? Go for a walk. And we would fill each other up with what we had been doing all these years that we've been away from each other, right? And that was because of the kindness that we put into that breakup that we had. Because just as much as it was hard on me, it was just as hard on him. And it took us a lot of years to get past that, right? 10 years before we divorced. It was a lot of back and forth. And for different reasons, right? Once that was said and done, it was said and done. There was nothing we could do. We couldn't go back into the past and take it back, right? But we can end things in kindness, right? We can appreciate the contributions of the people around us. And if things aren't going well, right? Even in that last job that I had, oh my goodness, the kindness of those last 2 weeks of my notice that I gave at that job, it blew my mind. It broke my heart in a good way. And there were so many lessons in that. And, if I walk into that store, right, I bump into senior management, there are no harsh feelings in that, right? There will be chit chats and conversations and catching up on what's been going on their part and on our part. No hard feelings, right? And that's one good thing about understanding there is no justifiable reason for jealousy and resentment, right? Because that is meant to make us feel that intent to each other, to want to talk behind people's backs, to say mean things, make it impossible that we can walk away feeling that if we were to bump into each other, that we could just pick up where we left off. Okay, you guys. That's my good chair. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, Tammy.